The ICF Training and Technical Assistance team is honored to welcome you to this California Housing and Community Development Community Workshop offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant, Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. I am Chris Pitcher from ICF. I'll be hosting today's session. Today's workshop is part of our Racial Equity Workshop series and is entitled Allyship and Activism. It is my privilege to introduce today's first presenter, and that will be Sarah Breyer. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Nice to be in the room with you, and I'm grateful for your presence at this training. I am an associate consultant with Racial Equity Partners, which does organizational transformation work in the area of race equity. Started out doing a lot of work in the homelessness space with homelessness organizations, and now works in private sector and public sector, nonprofit. I come to the work with, I run a consulting practice that centers race equity and policy development and organizational transformation, and have been working with Racial Equity Partners for a little bit under a year now. And I will pass it on to Rashima to introduce herself.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. My name is Rashima Melson. I go by she, her pronouns. I identify as Black. I'm a rep associate as well, and also CEO of Pain into Purpose. And we are super excited to be here with you all today to discuss allyship and activism. And also, we would love to know who you are. So please drop in the chat your name, your pronouns, and your race if you feel comfortable. And let us know who you're here representing. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Rashima. So today we're going to talk about allyship and activism. And over the course of our, we've done a number of trainings, and over the course of those trainings, we've talked about the history of racial injustice. We've talked about how internalized racism, how it shows up and how to heal from it. And most recently, we did a training on spheres of influence. And then some of that training, we talked about allyship. And so this is going to be, we're going to cover some of that again in this, but we're going to do it pretty briefly. And we're going to dig into this training a little bit about what inhibits our ability to show up as allies, and how we can be good allies at work, in the work context. So before we begin, we're going to just do a quick review of these guidelines, which we always do in the beginning of our trainings. These are the guidelines for courageous conversations that were developed by Glenn Singleton, who wrote a book about a decade or more ago in the education space, and they're still really relevant today. So I'm just going to go through them because they're really helpful in terms of structuring our time together. So we know that when we talk about race, it can be uncomfortable, and particularly uncomfortable for white people who are not used to talking about race. So we encourage folks, you're going to expect to experience discomfort. Stay with that discomfort. If you need to take a minute, if you need to take a break, take a breath, but come back to the conversation. So take care of yourself, but stay engaged, which is, of course, the next thing we encourage you to do. If you can stay, particularly when we go into small groups, if you can stay on camera, I think it helps us stay present and stay engaged. We only have 2 hours with each other today, so we really want to encourage folks to be with each other. Speak your truth, not someone else's truth. Use I statements. Speak from your own heart, and don't assume what other folks may be feeling or thinking. And finally, we've had centuries of entrenched racial injustice in this country. We're not going to undo it in these 2 hours or even over the course of this series, but we're going to get some skills, and we're going to get closer to learning how to do it. But we're not going to get closure is what we're not going to get. So we encourage folks to both expect and accept that we're not going to get closure today. So I'm going to ask folks to just pop into get us rolling a little bit. Pop into the chat what you think it takes to be an ally. And if you can pop it in, you don't need to go personal if you don't want to, but if you could put in just to get us rolling. You're listening and using my power to advocate for someone who has more to lose. If I see or hear injustice, call it in, call it out, help to educate people. These are great. Let's get rolling then. We're going to do a quick definition of what allyship means. So, of course, thank you, Lucretia, open to listening to different perspectives. These are all really important. We're going to cover these as we go through, but really dig into how it manifests, how do we actually do it, and what inhibits our ability to do it. So ally is certainly a noun, right? Usually used specifically of a person who's not a member of a marginalized group or mistreated group, but who expresses or gives support to that group. So you may consider yourself an ally, that's a noun. But even more importantly, ally is a verb, right? So to join yourself with another person group in order to give or get support. I think this issue of this question of ally being a verb is really important, because allyship should be active. It should be ongoing. Here's a definition from the Anti-Oppression Network. It's a consistent, arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating in which a person in a position of privilege and power seeks to operate in solidarity with a marginalized group. It's ongoing, it's consistent, it's about action. It's not just about identity. So most of us consider ourselves to be allies, or we'd like to think of ourselves as allies, but our actions don't always align with our self-perception. So why don't we always act as allies? We're going to dig in a little bit into what might be behind that. We're going to start off with a video by a poet and writer and scholar by the name of Clint Smith. His most recent book, How the Word Is Passed, was on the New York Times bestseller list. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. He takes a personal journey to understand everybody's relationship to race. It's a great read, and it's actually a great listen as well if you listen to books. And he talks about silence and how he himself sometimes feels does not speak up. So we're going to just go to his video, and Sita is going to cue that up for us.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a 1968 speech where he reflects upon the civil rights movement, states, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." As a teacher, I've internalized this message. Every day, all around us, we see the consequences of silence manifest themselves in the form of discrimination, violence, genocide, and war. In the classroom, I challenge my students to explore the silences in their own lives through poetry. We work together to fill those spaces, to recognize them, to name them, to understand that they don't have to be sources of shame. In an effort to create a culture within my classroom where students feel safe sharing the intimacies of their own silences, I have 4 core principles posted on the board that sits in the front of my class, which every student signs at the beginning of the year. Read critically, write consciously, speak clearly, tell your truth. I find myself thinking a lot about that last point, tell your truth. And I realized that if I was going to ask my students to speak up, I was going to have to tell my truth and be honest with them about the times where I failed to do so. So I tell them that growing up, as a kid in a Catholic family in New Orleans, during Lent, I was always taught that the most meaningful thing one could do was to give something up. Sacrifice something you typically indulge in to prove to God you understand his sanctity. I've given up soda, McDonald's, French fries, French kisses, and everything in between. But one year, I gave up speaking. Figured the most valuable thing I could sacrifice was my own voice, but it was like I hadn't realized that I had given that up a long time ago. I had spent so much of my life telling people the things they wanted to hear instead of the things they needed to. Told myself I wasn't meant to be anyone's conscience because I still had to figure out being my own, so sometimes I just wouldn't say anything. Appeasing ignorance with my silence, unaware that validation doesn't need words to endorse its existence. When Christian was beat up for being gay, I put my hands in my pocket and walked with my head down as if I didn't even notice. Couldn't use my locker for weeks because the bolt on the lock reminded me of the one I had put on my lips when the homeless man on the corner looked at me with eyes up, merely searching for an affirmation that he was worth seeing. I was more concerned with touching the screen of my Apple than actually feeding him one. When the woman at the fundraising gala said, "I'm so proud of you. It must be so hard teaching those poor, unintelligent kids," I bit my lip because apparently we needed her money more than my students needed their dignity. We spend so much time listening to the things people are saying that we rarely pay attention to the things they don't. Silence is the residue of fear. It is feeling your flaws gut-wrench guillotine your tongue. It is the air retreating from your chest because it doesn't feel safe in your lungs. Silence is Rwandan genocide. Silence is Katrina. It is what you hear when there aren't enough body bags left. It is the sound after the noose is already tied. It is charring. It is chains. It is privilege. It is pain. There is no time to pick your battles when your battles have already picked you. I will not let silence wrap itself around my indecision. I will tell Christian that he is a lion, a sanctuary of bravery and brilliance. I will ask that homeless man what his name is and how his day was, because sometimes all people want to be is human. I will tell that woman that my students can talk about transcendentalism like their last name was Thoreau, and just because you watch one episode of The Wire doesn't mean you know anything about my kids. So this year, instead of giving something up, I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue, a stage on the underside of my inhibition. Because who has to have a soapbox when all you've ever needed is your voice? Thank you.
What? Well, that video always brings me practically to tears. We would love to have a large group discussion right now. And rather than showing a slide, that what we just want to talk about and get folks engaged in thinking internally and some internal reflection around what, if anything, prevents you from speaking up and using your voice as an ally.
This is Debbie Harder from Shasta Community Health Center. I think that he said it very well with his verbs as far as silence is a residue of fear. You know, when I think about just the times I've been silenced, I think that that is probably the driving factor.
Thanks, Debbie. And we're gonna dig in a little bit into what underlies that fear. What could be going on there? What are we scared of? Thank you for sharing.
Sarah, this is Dawn Patori from Shasta County.
Hi.
And I would share that I think I was more apt to speak up when I was younger and single. And as I became a mother and had to worry about what I do affects my children, and then the safety factor of when I speak up, or as some may put my nose into business that's not my own, that the backlash could affect my children. And so that has silenced me a little more because I worry about their safety.
Yeah.
And these days, things are more dangerous. You can look at someone and they will mistake your look, and that could cause a, harm, serious harm, physically and emotionally.
Thank you, Dawn. That's such a good point. And I think it is really critical, as you say, to remember that there are larger structural forces at play here, and it's not always safe to speak up in all circumstances. It doesn't prevent us from being an ally. And so one of the questions is, how can we, what are the many ways that we can be an ally? And how do we gauge when our personal safety might be at risk, but there's other things that we can do.
Yeah, and also to that point, Sarah, I think one thing about what prevents you from speaking up, I see a lot of comments about harm and also what you all just shared. And then I also think about judgment, right? We're human. So to some degree, we care what people think about us. And so if our opinion or if us um, taking actions to show that we're allies cause us to mean that we're thinking differently or against what our people are supposed to think, or our family or our friends, it forces us right into a box where it's like, I don't know if I want to, and could potentially be a prevention method for us speaking up. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that had crossed my mind.
Thank you, Rashima. That's right. Sort of that internal friction, particularly with people who we might identify with or be close to. Other thoughts here? Thank you guys for sharing.
I would say I have been silent for so long, and I finally started asking myself, what do I really have to lose? And like facing down my fear. And since doing that, I feel so much freer. And I realized that a lot of my fears were never came to pass. So it's not what keeps me silent anymore. It's recognizing that recognizing the power that I have. I am a white woman. I'm an educated white woman. I live in a pretty safe community. I have so much privilege. Why am I not spending it on behalf of others who don't have that privilege, who have a lot more to lose? And it just makes, I don't know, for me, it makes life a lot more interesting to step into it rather than step away from it.
Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that. That sounds really powerful, and as you say, freeing to have been able to make that decision to face your fear, shunt your fear aside and take that step and be brave. And it sounds like it's come back to you in force and in a more full life.
And I think also another thing that could potentially, thinking about myself, is as a Black woman and growing up in impoverished communities, speaking up could potentially set me back. So it's neither nor harm nor judgment, but being that person to say I'm going to stand up could potentially, in a sense, when we talk about power, set me back from reaching my goals, because then I'll be looked at as everyone else and they'll say, oh, you agree with this? And so that's another thing that comes to mind when thinking about what prevents you from speaking up.
Yeah, that people, thank you, Rashima. It's so true that people with privilege have a different role to play here, right? There's in different circumstances, there's less at stake, a lot less at stake. Thank you for bringing that up. Let's move on and dig in a little bit. I'm going to share my screen again. And we're going to talk a little bit about these stumbling blocks to allyship, and we're going to dig in a little bit into some of the things that you all mentioned. And there's lots of stumbling blocks, and we're not going to be able to dig into everything today, of course, but we'll begin the journey. It is true that to the extent that we can identify what's keeping us from being an ally, then we can accelerate our own allyship, facilitate that in our own lives. The first thing I want to talk about is recognizing our own blinders. So most of us carry at least one form of privilege. Maybe you're cisgender, maybe you're heterosexual, maybe you're Christian, maybe you're able-bodied, maybe you're white. And that privilege can prevent us from fully seeing and understanding the experiences of others. And without really fully understanding and seeing and hearing those experiences, we can't actually be, we can't be in allyship. So we're gonna watch a quick video about how our privilege can prevent us from actually seeing. And Sita, if you could cue that up, I would be grateful. Thank you.
In the garden, there's a caterpillar and a snail, and they're basically best friends. They hang out 24/7. They do dinner, movie nights, crafts. Oh, and they're like really into cosplay on top of like whatever else caterpillars and snails do, like eat leaves or something. Anyways, one day they're on their way to a party that's right outside the garden, and they have to go through the fence to get there. So the caterpillar goes right through, but the snail is stuck. Her shell is just too big and it won't fit under the wire. So she's like, crap, I can't get through. Maybe like, can you lift up the wire, or maybe we can build a little bridge or something? And the caterpillar's like, dude, just go under. But she can't. There's just no way that the shell is gonna fit. And the caterpillar's like, go under, come on, we're gonna be late and I'm trying to hook up with that super cute ladybug. But it's not happening. The shell will not fit under the wire. And at this point, Snail's getting kind of frustrated because it's not like she doesn't want to go to the party, but for some reason, Caterpillar just isn't getting it. Yeah, it's not that easy for me. I just can't crawl under the fence like you can, so I would really appreciate your help here. Maybe we can like go a different way, and this just like sets the caterpillar off. What the heck? Just because I can crawl under stuff doesn't mean that I have it easy. Do you even know what it's like to have 16 feet? You don't, because finding shoes is a complete nightmare. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not saying you have it easy. I'm just saying I can't go under the fence because of my shell. That's it. I have a shell and you don't. And there's some stuff that's easier for you that's harder for me. Just like I don't know jack about finding shoes because I don't have feet. Caterpillar thinks about this for a second and realizes the snail is right. I mean, he's never had to think about shells or slimy trails, and that's a privilege that the snail has never had because she has to think about that stuff all the time. That's part of being a snail. And it's kind of like that for everyone, right? I mean, we all have our own struggles and challenges, and some of them are small and some of them are huge and really unfair and beyond our control. And a lot of the time, it can be hard to see what someone else deals with because you've never been in their shoes or shell. Like maybe you're gay or trans, have a disability, or different religion, or of course the obvious one, you're a member of a different race. I don't know what it's like to be you, and you don't know what it's like to be me. So it's really important to stop and try and see the other side so we can help each other overcome those obstacles together. It's like sometimes you're the snail and sometimes you're the caterpillar. Oh yeah, okay, so then the snail and the caterpillar figured out that if they went to the other side of the garden, they could get through a little break in the fence. And while it took a little longer to get to the party, they did the trip together, which is what made it so great. So they got to the party, the caterpillar hooked up with the ladybug, snail taught everyone how to do the wobble, and the party was everything. The end. This video was illustrated by the very talented and
So that video was by Francesca Ramsey, and if you follow her YouTube channel, she has a bunch of really on point and solid videos about race relations and racism in this country, and she obviously uses humor to get her point across. So I highly recommend that you check her out. I'm gonna share screen again. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the ways that we can get in our own way of being an ally. So I'm a huge fan of Dolly Chugh. I don't know if you've read her book, The Person You Mean to Be. I highly recommend it. She has a newsletter that comes out. She's a professor at NYU in social psychology. And her book, The Person You Mean to Be, really digs into what prevents us from, what is this in these ways, what are some of the ways that we are prevented from being allies in our lives. So in this book, she talks about central moral identity. And she says there's two main components to identity. So the first is identity claiming. So we all claim certain identities. I claim an identity as a white person, as a mother, as a Jewish person, as being fair-minded, right? And then there's identity granting. That's how other people see you. So we're super eager to have the identities that we claim to be granted by other people. If we're unsure that these identities are being granted, it's a moment of self-threat. And once in self-threat, we can get really stressed, we get defensive. So as a result, we're constantly seeking affirmation. We're always looking for people to affirm the identities that we've claimed. So how does this play out in allyship? It plays out in many ways, but I'll highlight two ways that it plays out. The first is that most of us see ourselves as good people who do the right thing and can act in allyship. But when trying to be an ally, we might be more focused on being perceived as an ally. We're looking for cookies, we're looking for that affirmation. And this makes our actions all about us rather than about the harm party, rather than about the group that we're trying to ally ourselves with. So it can lead to actions that are unhelpful. It can even lead to actions that are hurtful. And it certainly can be at best, it can be unhelpful. The second way that this issue around affirmation can, and this issue around central moral identity can get in the way of our allyship is that because most of us, probably all of us, have a central moral identity as a good person, but if we're really honest with ourselves, most of us also regularly do less good things, right? That aren't in alignment with our identity, with our self-identity as a good person. So for instance, I see myself as a social justice advocate, but if I'm really honest with myself, there are many times that I do not act or give money or resources or my time in a way that aligns with this identity. So in point of fact, what Dolly Chugh would say is that I'm a good-ish person. I'm not good, I'm not bad, I'm good-ish. And we're all kind of good-ish people. We're not perfect. But if we claim this moral identity of being a good person as a fixed identity, we will likely feel shame when we fail to act, when we fall short. We'll feel really bad about ourselves. And this shame will cause us to shut down, to tunnel in. Shame is all about ourselves, about our failures, right? Brene Brown advocates that it's better for us not to feel shame, but to feel guilt, right? Guilt is about behavior, and it gives you a path forward. So you're not a bad person. Your central moral identity needn't be threatened when you fail to act in this perfect way. Your actions have just fallen short, and the next time you can improve. There's a way to move forward. So how do we do this? Dolly Chugh encourages us to adopt Carol Dweck's growth mindset approach. So mindset refers to our belief and our capacity to learn and improve. So for instance, if I had a growth mindset about swimming, which I like to do, I would believe that eventually I can learn to do the butterfly with enough time and practice and coaching and feedback and time and practice. I would learn to do the butterfly. But if I had a fixed mindset, I would believe that I'm terrible at butterfly and destined never to learn it and would never even try. I'm just a person who cannot swim butterfly. It's just who I am. Fixed mindset is either or. It allows no room for being a work in progress. A growth mindset accepts that we will make mistakes. And a growth mindset embraces mistakes as a learning opportunity. To think, that was a good mistake. I can learn from that mistake. I can grow from that mistake. I can be better. So we all have blind spots. When it comes to race, we tend to embrace a fixed mindset. Particularly white people will say, I'm not racist. And we're walking on good person eggshells, and we're afraid to act, afraid to be seen as contrary to the identity that we've claimed. Be better to embrace a growth mindset. I know to say, I know I have work to do in this area. I am growing in this area, accept that I'm going to make mistakes. I will make good mistakes, and I will hold myself accountable for those mistakes, hold myself accountable for my actions, and learn and grow. Allyship calls it stumbling upward, that you're getting better and you're going to make mistakes as you go, but as you go up, you're stumbling as you get along. So we're going to break out with just that little orientation to some of the ways that we can get, our psychology can get in our own way of voicing and stepping into allyship spaces. We're going to break out into small groups. And we'd like folks to share and describe a time when you embraced discomfort and spoke up as an ally. What inspired you to do it? What fears did you have to overcome? What was easy about it? What was difficult? We encourage you as you go into this space to try to keep your camera on, to stay present. If you need to take a break, but try to come back and be in the room. We'll have 15 minutes for the discussion, and then we'll come back at the end for some share outs. You might want to take a picture. Rashima's put the questions into the chat, but I don't know, but you might want to just take a picture of the screen if you can. So
yeah, so it's going to go into the chat with them, but we won't be able to communicate with them. But you all should already see the previous messages that are in the chat. You should be good to go.
Awesome. So with that, I think we'll go into breakouts.
Yep. So just a few notes on breakout sessions for everyone. The main room will be a breakout session for folks specifically. If anyone needs to have subtitles like I have going right now, we'll keep you here. So just note it for us. Otherwise, your breakout room is starting and we have 15 minutes, which brings us back at 11:48. And Sarah and Rashima, this should be the breakout room. So if you want to get folks started and jump to other rooms, go ahead. Otherwise, folks can just start to share.
I came in late, so maybe I'm not assigned to a room.
This is a room, so you were.
Oh,
Veronica.
it just did it. Sorry.
So this is so Chris, this is one of the breakout rooms.
Sorry about that, guys. I thought, oh yeah,
It is.
I'm hanging out here.
Yep, you're not hanging out. This is the breakout room.
Right. So the question then in front of us is to describe a time when you embraced discomfort and spoke up as an ally. What inspired you to do it? What fears you had to overcome? What was easy? What was difficult?
So I can't really think of a time when I've done it because of a racial issue. But there's a time that keeps coming to mind fairly recently. I was at the grocery store and there was an older white man in the check stand next to me. And he was flirting with the very young cashier. And he was saying things that were inappropriate. They weren't like sexual in nature, but they were not appropriate. And she looked very uncomfortable and very afraid. And he just kept going and he wasn't paying attention to her body language or anything. So I spoke up when he had finished the transaction and needed to leave, but was still flirting with her. And I said, you know, you probably shouldn't be saying those kind of things. She's a young girl and she looks really uncomfortable. And he got really rude and told me to mind my own business and that it didn't involve me. And I said, well, this young girl looks uncomfortable and the way you're talking to her is not appropriate. And I think you need to leave. And he just kind of kept going, but he grabbed his stuff and he left. And she thanked me after. But I mean, my stomach was up here and I was shaking and I probably turned red and I could feel the adrenaline in my bloodstream and just, am I doing the right thing? Like, is she going to get in trouble by one of her managers because I spoke up on her behalf? Like, all of these things happened in my brain in about 10 or 15 seconds. and you know, I moved on with life. You know, I wished her to have a great day. The cashier I was working with smiled at me and, you know, was kind of like, rock on. So I know that, you know, I just, it's really hard to call people out, especially, but I felt comfortable because I was surrounded by a bunch of people that they may not get involved, but they're not gonna, you know, I know that they're gonna be at least a little supportive of me.
I love that. And I just thank you for sharing. I think we all started smiling when you really talked about how courageous you were, and knowing how difficult of a situation that must have been. We always talk about the 5 standard prevention strategies, and you were direct, right? Out of the 5 Ds, you were direct, and you were just like, you don't feel comfortable, like, you know, how you said, like your stomach was up to here, but you put someone else first, right? And so here we are uplifting and zooming in on the fact that allyship pertaining to race, but it starts at something small. And so I love that you pointed that out to say, well, it wasn't race particularly, but I did stand up for someone. And that's what matters, because it's little steps to get to where you want to be. And so I just want to applaud you for that, because that was really amazing. And I wish more people would do that, right? A lot of people sit there and they're like, I can see something's happening, but I'm not going to get involved, right? And as you said, all the questions that went through your head. So that was just awesome. So just thank you for sharing, and thank you for just being amazing in that situation, because that is a form of allyship and taking the action that we talk about. Yeah. Any others who want to share their responses or reflections to the questions that we asked about describing a time when you embraced discomfort and spoke up as an ally? What inspired you? What fears did you overcome? What was easy and what was difficult?
The latest one that I had was having to call my own family out on anti-trans comments. And that was really uncomfortable because it was my family, but it also felt easy because I did that before publicly. We had an incident that made the national news, and not in a good way, about a young trans child at one of our schools. And it was a sister school of my daughter's charter middle and high school. And I went and spoke at the board meeting, you know, in front of 400 people, along with many other friends of mine, about the need for inclusivity. And that, you know, I felt this urge in that instance to not let this kid like fall by the wayside. And partly because my daughter had friends who were in the community, and they were getting along great. And all I was thinking was, you know, well, doggone it, this kid's going to grow up and come into their school as they grow older. And how I'm not going to have an environment that's been inclusive change, you know, and that the big kids should trickle down. So it was more on that. But calling out my own family when my brother said that he was fine with trans people as long as they weren't in his face about it. I'm like, you mean as long as you don't know they're trans? I'm like, then you're not a fan, then you're not an ally, you know? And so I shut him down. Like, I was like, you know, like, your comments are really insensitive and rude, and you need to stop it right now. And that's the hardest I've ever shut a family member down. So having done it before, the public one would have seemed harder, but there were other people. I had friends there, you know, we were all like, yeah, we're gonna make it happen. And that made it easier, having a group of like-minded people. When you're standing alone, it's hard. You know, and I remember even living in a very segregated area, and I remember saying, hey, I'm open to dating interracially because it's more important that a person treats me right than what color they are. Holy cow, did that not go over well with my family? You know, that was many years ago, but I think it's just always harder for us to stand up when we feel like we're the only one.
Mhm.
And maybe if we remembered that a lot of times there's maybe other people who are also afraid to stand up, and maybe if one of us stands up, then some of the others will.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for standing up in that instance. And, you know, it can be, usually there's like a 20-60-20 rule. I don't know if you've heard this, right? So there's like 20% of the folks that are always going to be with you, 60% that maybe are on the fence, and 20% are never going to be with you, right? And your goal, or one goal, could always be to focus on that 60%. The folks that are maybe on the fence and maybe seeing you stand up will inspire them to stand up as well. I do know that calling out family members is, we talk about sort of that central moral identity and the identities that we claim, and who gives us affirmation, who gives us those cookies. Like, it's having family members affirm who we are is so important. And when we call out or call in family members around things that they've said or things that they're doing, it can be really difficult. I know I recently had to call out my mother-in-law for language that she was using, and you know, it was I think she learned from it, and I noticed she's not using that language anymore, but it definitely you know, there was a lot of crying, and it was not an easy thing to do or to be in process with. Is there any other folks that want to chime in?
I have a flawed and imperfect example I'm hoping to present, mostly to hear what might have gone differently. But this is in a previous role. I worked food service for a long time, and part of my informal promise to any other staff member I trained was, at any time, for any or no reason, I will switch customers with you if you have someone you can't work with. So usually this was like what Veronica talked about. If we had an older man hitting on a tender young cashier or server, I would switch out. I was a little older, I was a little crustier, and I did that several times. One of my trainees was a Black man, and this was a very, very white area. And he came to me when I was in the middle of plating and stressed out, shoulders around his ears, says, "Miriam, I need to switch." And so I did, handed him the plate in my hand, took his tables, and it was a well-dressed white lady with a statement necklace. And she was, I showed up with her food and got a very triumphant, smirk from her. And then she was perfectly nice to me the whole time. And I found out later that she didn't want my trainee touching her food because she thought he was dirty. And so this was an intervention. This was something we'd arranged before. This was supporting my trainee the way he asked for. This was also enabling, not stopping, her, pretty egregious racism.
If you had that moment again, what would you do differently? What did you learn from that?
I'm genuinely not sure how I should have done it differently. And that's part of why I'm still looking at these trainings to learn more. Because on the one hand, this is food service. My job was specifically keep the customers happy. And I was doing what my trainee had asked for. I was intervening in the way he asked to get him out of the situation. And I think my first duty was to my trainee to protect him rather than to try to educate or stop this woman. But at the same time, this is still being quietly part of the system, which is prioritizing her comfort over his, and her comfort over his ability, her unearned comfort over his ability to do his job. And so I'm still not sure how I could have done it differently or how I should have.
I wonder, do other folks have thoughts? I see someone, Veronica, posted how typical it could be when you're in an employment role. Yeah. Do other folks have thoughts around things that Miriam could have done or that could happen in the future?
My thought is, like, if I were in your shoes and had an opportunity to do it again, maybe instead of taking over, accompanying him to the table. And but you really didn't know why. You didn't know what was going on. So you just thought it was, he just needs this. You didn't understand the context. So
Yeah, that
it
was
may not
later
have
when we
even,
were off shift that I found out what she said to him.
right. But if I was to know, maybe going to the table with him instead of for him. And then if she, you know, she may not have been as willing to be that way in front of you to him. Just a thought.
It occurs to me too, in mentioning this, or the employment, possibly losing your job. This is structural too. So there's an interpersonal thing that's happening between you and the customer, but there's also a structural issue around what's tolerated in that environment, right? And so there might have been a structural way to address it with your boss, right? What should, to have a conversation or staff-wide conversation around how should we address patrons who
Yeah.
are bigoted.
And I think Veronica, you also, I think those are both good points. And I think that ideas of what might have been more just, you know, would have involved kicking out the customer who was rude to our, who was behaving really inappropriately to our staff, and structuring it so the consequences fell that way. But even then my trainee, the server, doesn't get whatever she would have tipped. And there's still consequences because of the structural element. There's still consequences.
It does sort of speak to issues within the system altogether, though, doesn't it? You know, because the way food service is structured, it's inherently inequitable because you have to accept things you might not want because otherwise you're not going to get paid minimum wage, even if you don't get a tip. And that's a tough position for anyone to be in.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing I want to underline that made this easier for me is that I had a relationship. This was my trainee. We talked about it beforehand. We had plans for what he could do if he needed help, and a specific way I could help him, which structured the relationship and made it easier. The examples that you were talking about were both with, or rather, Veronica, your example was with a stranger in a situation where you hadn't made plans ahead of time about what would be a helpful intervention. And so I think that structured rather than freeform did make it easier for me, even though it was an imperfect and ineffective intervention.
It looks like folks are, thank you for sharing that. And it highlights this is not either or, there's no clear roadmap. These things are complicated, right? And thinking through sort of those missed opportunities, right, can help us in the future, right? That it's not a, oof, I didn't do it, but what would that look like in the future? What can I learn from that? That growth mindset is so important, but thank you for sharing that. I don't know if, looks like folks aren't totally back in the room. I know I don't see Rashima, so we're going to give ourselves a few more minutes.
It's just starting to close, so you have a few minutes. You have about a minute and a half.
Gotcha. All right. We're going to wait just a minute or so for everyone to get back into the room with us, and then we'll take a couple of share outs.
We came exactly back. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, oh, they left. And then I was like, We're snatched back. Awesome. So we're all back together. Awesome, awesome. There was some awesome discussion in the breakout room that I went in, and I know before I left the one you weren't, Sarah, there was some really great discussion. We would love for you all to kind of do tell us about what you all discussed, to hear some similarities. And I talked about validation in the group that I just left. And so would love for you all to share. And again, we'll say the questions, which are: describe a time when you embraced discomfort and spoke up as an ally. What inspired you to do it? What fears did you have to overcome? What was easy? And then what was difficult?
I'm talkative today. I'll share. So I had shared about a situation, and I got really good feedback about how it was, an appropriate response. There was another share in our group that I felt was particularly useful because they wanted to have a better response, but we were able to brainstorm some reflections on what could have been done either in addition to or after. And so that feeling of not knowing what to do and having that hesitation, even if you don't do what it is that you in hindsight wish you had done, you can always work back with the folks. Like this was in an employment situation. So working back with the coworkers and the team about doing better next time, or how do we approach this?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said something that was really key of what I wanted to do or what I could have done, right? But it's like you did something, right? And we talked about the importance of it being a start, of starting at the least, right? Because you didn't ignore, right? And so that's the really, really important part. And I just, again, wanted to thank you for that, because when I heard what you said, it was really super amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Any others who want to share their responses or anything that they discussed within their breakout rooms?
This is Debbie Harder. I had shared my personal experience with my sister, and I used some terminology that I grew up with. I know that things have changed even from when she was little, but my sister is disabled, and it's very apparent by how when we're speaking about our clients, how she presents herself. So she's in a wheelchair. She is not able to communicate like you are and I. So I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat that popped up. So she is what we would say now is mentally challenged. When I was growing up, it was like mental retardation. There was different classifications. We would always have people either impose their opinions on us on who she was as a person or what we should do or not do as a family. And this even as to very recently, it comes from the medical community, it comes from the community at large. So I was sharing that my first reaction is anger. But I find that I can get further with educating individuals. Sometimes I just don't even give, honestly, sometimes I won't give the time of day. It just depends upon what we're doing, and do I have the energy right then and there to say something. But when I am at my best, I'm able to educate on what is our specific situation. And a lot of times that diffuses it and I get a different reaction. but that does take a lot of energy and thinking about my response prior to engaging.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Debbie. And I do think that one of the things that when we speak up, it's helpful to think about what's the purpose. Is it to change the behavior of the person who is behaving in an inappropriate way? Is it to show the person who's the one being targeted? If there is a person in the room who's being hurt, to show that they have a friend in the room, they have an ally, that you're sticking up for them, that you can change and these circumstances change all the time. So sort of thinking about what is the intent? Is it to change that person? Is it to move the needle? Is it to defend someone who's been offended? Sometimes you can do all three, do all of them, right? But sometimes you have to choose what's the most important in that moment.
I also want to just thank you for sharing that, Debbie. I wanted to point out something you said about the first thing you felt was anger, right? And sometimes anger, it could blind us or put a veil over our head so that we act in a way that we typically wouldn't. And something that I try to do when I notice that I'm being distracted, whether that's by emotions or something else that's taking place, I use a delay intervention. And so I do 10 minutes of being engaged. 10 minutes of being active, which means I go on a walk, or I do some type of form of deep breathing, something that kind of gets me moving. And then I do something that keeps me engaged for about 20 minutes. And then that's writing, journaling, something that happens to kind of really get it out, right? Because we still need to release what that energy that we felt. And then I do something to soothe myself, whether that's light candles, drink a glass of wine, take a long bubble bath, whatever it is that soothes you, to kind of, and that's a 1 hour, I call it a 1 hour delay intervention. So that like I kind of pause and I think about it for a moment. And I know that sometimes we don't always have the ability to take that hour because something could happen right then and there. But I just want to point that out because, and I know you care so much about your sister, but I know that this is probably something that happens more than once, right? And so trying to cope with that and figuring out a way to be able to take care of yourself as well, because we're talking about being allies for others, but then making sure that you have that time for yourself to make sure you're okay. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you again for sharing. Any other responses, or does anyone else want to share what you all discussed in your breakout rooms? We're getting some really, really awesome responses back. So thank you all for that.
If not, then I think we can, Chris, I think we can go to our intermission and take a
Go to our intermission. Yes, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for the activity in the breakout rooms. There was definitely a few stories I heard that really resonated for me. It is noon in the Pacific time zone. We will come back at noon 05, so 5 minutes from now. So go do the things you need to do, and we will see you back here at 12:05.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I'm loving this energy in the room. Really great, joyous vibes. And I know this is a difficult topic because it highlights and points us on what we could improve on. I don't like to say what we could do better, what we're doing wrong, right? We always go from good to great. And so we're touching on our improvement areas and what we can do. And so with that, we can jump to the next slide. Awesome. So for this one, we're going to be talking about how we can be an ally and how we can improve on being an ally, right? And then we're going to dig into what being a good ally looks like. So the first thing is, for instance, and I just want to bring this up, I heard a lot of great responses about, I don't know if I'm doing it right, or if I did it wrong. And so to that point, I want to say how to get started on this is you can do your research before asking questions. And so, and those are two different parts. So for the research part, we want to make sure that we can use Google. Research could be a form of, we all love qualitative data. So asking people is a form of research, right? Instead of directly going to that person, we may want to ask other people in our circle that we know. If it's a Black, Indigenous, or another person of color, or any other marginalized group, or even if it's, when we talk about ableism, when we talk about other types of isms, if it's a person within that population, do your research, right? And research reading, Google, talking to people to see, hey, you know, and kind of approach it lightly. I don't know if I did this right, and I just want to know, how can I do better? What are some methods that I can improve? Elaborate on how you did it, and then really be open, because you've allowed that person in your space now that you've been open and vulnerable to letting them know, be open to receiving what information they tell you, right? So that's a part of your research. And then really getting in and asking the questions, because you can take that to that specific situation that you may be thinking of and asking those questions there. And then we want to go into actively listening. And so this is just another form of not just listening. So in my community, like in the Black community, we have two sayings. We say, I hear you, and I'm listening. I hear you means it went through one ear and it went out the other. But actively listening means I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm taking it in, I'm processing it, right? And sometimes some of us are slower processors than others. So sometimes it's good to just be silent and listen to what a person's saying, and don't always project what you think was right. Just listen to what's going on. And then also amplifying other voices. So and we're going to get into this a little bit later. When we're in a meeting or something of that nature, and you notice that in that room, a white person's voice is being more amplified or uplifted than a marginalized person's voice, you know, say something, say pause. I just heard so-and-so say this, you know, uplift the fact that, you know, it wasn't that person's idea, but uplift that person and let them feel recognized and acknowledged, right? So that's a way to show allyship. And then understanding your biases. So this is kind of where we do a self-reflection and really digging deep into ourselves and being honest with ourselves, because nobody knows us like us. Even if in public facing, we seem like we're great and we're doing things that seem amazing, we can read our own minds, right? Because we birth those thoughts. And so understand where your biases lie and where you can improve and try to kind of dissolve them. Yeah, so try to understand your biases. And then apologize when you make a mistake, right? But apologies are not, I'm sorry, and then, hey, I said I'm sorry, it is what it is. You feel how you feel about it. I said I was sorry, and then you move on. An apology is really digging into understanding what you did to potentially offend or cause harm to somebody, right? Because it's always impact over intent. So even if you meant the best, if you notice that it caused some type of harm, understand that and admit that and say, I apologize for so-and-so. I understand that it X, Y, and Z. And you're showing that person, like, I'm being honest and truthful. I really meant that. I'm really sincere and I apologize, whether it's to a group of people or individual person. And then also we want to acknowledge that systemic oppression exists, right? So sometimes people say, oh, you're still talking about slavery? That was so long ago. But the impact when generations upon generations that it has caused, right? And understanding how it has led to where we are now, understanding why we have a majority of our population are people of color and how we got here, right? So that plays a huge impact in understanding that and uplifting that and not trying to ignore it or dismiss it. And then you want to think about how can you be an ally in all aspects of your life. So we're going to touch a little bit more into this. So I'll say this one because we're going to touch a little bit more into this one, and then be prepared to do the work, right? So it's like, for me, I know I need to lose some weight. And I keep telling myself I need to lose some weight, but I'm not doing what I need to do to lose that weight. So when we point out our biases and we do all these things and we're listening and we're doing our research and we're like, okay, we have this information, we know what to do. Now it's time to act on it. You have to be serious about it and be adamant about it and move forward. And even if you feel like you didn't do it right, I'm never going to tell you or say it in a negative way that you were wrong or this wasn't right. We always say, even when you fall, we say get back up, but what I always say is fall forward. So just like when we talked earlier, even if you feel like you didn't do it right, you fell for it because you did something, right? You didn't just do anything. Do nothing. So we want to make sure that we're prepared to do that work. Chris, can you move us to the next slide? Okay, so here we want to talk about how our commitment to allyship, right? And so we want to talk about our spectrum of engagement, right? And so this is where we understand our comfortability levels. And here is, how am I comfortable? What am I comfortable in doing? And something that we want to really point up, and I've said this a couple of times throughout this presentation already, is the 5 Ds. So it's like a standby intervention methods that we use when something is taking place, right? So we have direct, delegate, we have delay, document, and distract. And you have to figure out within that, where are you comfortable in really showing your effort of allyship, right? And so direct is directly standing up when you see an injustice or an inequity or something not right taking place, and you feel, hey, I feel comfortable. And whether you don't feel comfortable, you're like, I'm going to do it anyway. I want to take this action. That's been direct. And then we have distract. When you see something taking place and you see harm caused to a person, but you don't necessarily want the potential backlashes that could come with that, whether that's retaliation, whether it's harm, whether it's judgment, distract that situation. So if you see something taking place, do a huge distraction. And the distraction is they don't know that you're causing it. So do a distraction that potentially takes energy and attention away from that situation. And then we have delay. So delay is, I didn't have I don't want to say the courage, but I wasn't there in a place where I could step in or do something. And once the situation is over and that fire is kind of ceasing, go to that person who has been harmed and say, hey, are you okay? How are you? Check in on them, right? I saw what happened. You can, even if you feel the need to, apologize for not stepping in, but understanding that was harm with that, and let them know that I saw you, I acknowledge what happened, you're not alone. What can I do from here to help you to move forward? And then we have delegate. So I don't really want to be responsible for this because of the backlashes that may come with that. I may feel uncomfortable with this. Who is around that could potentially help me? Who else can I delegate this to? And then we have document. And so I know that in some states it is illegal to record people without their permission. In some states it's not, but you have record, you have audio record, you can take a picture, and you can write it out, put a date on it, write it out, and then you can take it to somewhere that more action can be taken. But you find where you are comfortable in being an ally. And so with that, we'll move to being an ally in private. And so here, oh no, go back for me one time. And so here is, for instance, if we're in a store, right? The point of this one being in private is we talk a lot about silence, and we listen to what Clinton said earlier. And I love his definition of what he said, right? But I realized something. Just because you're silent doesn't mean you're not taking action, right? I believe in stealth. So I'm going to get the job done, but you may not notice that I'm getting it done. So what I like to say is we're not going to ignore, but we're going to move in silence. If we are not ready to be direct, right, when we talked about those other Ds, if we're not ready to be direct, we're going to be an ally in private. So that means if I'm in a store, right, and I'm a person of privilege, and I see a person who's a part of a marginalized communities or a community that's been marginalized, and something's taking place where they're shopping and the owner staring them down. What are you buying? Being really racially profiling them. And I don't want to step in to say something. I may do something privately, right? If that owner asks the person to leave the store, I may step outside and say, hey, is there something you particularly wanted to buy? I may buy it for them. Or if you see them about to buy something, I don't know, any way that you could step in and say something. Or I may stop supporting that store. I may say, hey, I don't like the fact that you're being racist. So I'm not going to fund this store anymore. I'm going to shop somewhere else where they're inclusive and they welcome all people. And so that's a way to be in private as well, because you notice that. Because why would you keep funding a business if you see that inequities are taking place? And for me, and I shared this with the rest of the group in one of my breakout rooms, being a person who has experienced homelessness, there is a stigma to typically what we say is a homeless person. I will not claim that. We always use person first language in saying a person experiencing homelessness. And I don't have that look right? So when I go into a store, and this has happened before, and I've seen another person who was experiencing homelessness, and they were just trying to buy something from Starbucks. They had about $3 and change, and they were trying to buy something. The person said, we don't serve your kind. I went ahead and told the person to order whatever they wanted, and I paid for it, right? Because that was my way of stepping up and showing that I'm an ally, because I saw an injustice happening and I wanted to help out in whatever way I could, right? And so that's just a form of how to be an ally in private if you're not ready to go public, or if you're not ready to make really big actions, or even if you don't want to be direct, you can still not ignore, but move in silence and stealth. And then the last one of this have really been committed is holding yourself accountable, right? So like we said, we talked a lot about reflection. What can I do better?
Shima, I think, has frozen up a little bit.
If it's not a great outcome, but you notice yourself being more comfortable in taking steps. And so you reflect upon what you could have do better, and you try to say, next time I'll do 1% more. I'll do 1% this, and you take it slow to when you build up to whatever your 100% is. Next slide, Sarah. Okay, and so here we want to talk about the 4 common misconceptions of allyship. So this is where we talk about where we can improve or what we can build upon. And so the first one is performative allyship, right? So this is seeking praise or, posting on social media, but taking no further action, right? And wanting the affirmation that you're doing a great job. And so what you'll see a lot of billionaires and millionaires donating to organizations and schools and impoverished communities, and they're praised, they're uplifted, like, oh, I love this scholarship foundation, I love this organization because they do all these great things. And if you ever meet these people, you're like, wow, you really don't like them at all, or you really don't care at all, because as long as your money is attached to you and it seemed like that you did something amazing, then you get the praise for it. And it actually takes away from the people who are in need of that allyship. It actually puts the glory on you, and you're saying, yes, I did great because I did this, but you didn't take a challenging action. So it's easy to throw money at something instead of actually stepping into that action. The other part of it is platitudes, right? When we talked about the social media posting, you're doing all the social media posting, you done made your profile picture Black, you want to show that you're for the people, you're doing all these things, but in person, if somebody meets you, you are so different from the social media character that you portray. And so you want to make sure that those things are aligning, that when you post those things on social media, you are backing it up in person as well, right? You don't want to be something and say this, and then when it's time to take action, you say, oh, I don't know. And I don't want to confuse this with your 1%. So for you, if your 1% is, I will start posting stuff on social media, I will start making people aware of things, let that be your 1%. But if you're just posting things just to show in a public facing way that, hey, I'm doing a great job, then we want to do a little better and make sure that we can improve upon that. The next thing is a position, right? So we want to talk about having a title and calling yourself an ally, but what are you actually doing to be an ally, right? And so something we're going to get deeper into this when we talk about microaggressions, but for people who say, yeah, no, I don't do that, I have Black friends. Or, I would never do this because, my brother is so-and-so, right? So you're saying you're an ally, but your actions aren't aligning with what you're saying. So you want to make sure that you're aligning your actions with who you're saying you are. And then my favorite one to touch on, right? Because this is something we're human beings, and this is something that we commonly want to be. It's perfect, right? We strive to be perfect. We strive to have straight A's in school. We strive to make 100% okay, even though we need self-care, right? And we need to sometimes take a break. So when we talk about the 4 misconceptions of allyship, perfection is like the ultimate one, right? Of understanding and accepting that there is no such thing as perfect, right? As Winston Churchill said, perfection is the enemy of progress. Our goal is to make sure that we're progressing, right? Perfection is not going to end homelessness. perfection is not going to end racism. None of those things are going to do anything, because if you're just trying to be perfect, you're always focusing on how do I be better, and a way of just pointing out the mistake. What we want to do is really elevate. I did this then, and now I can do this now, right? Focusing on that 1%. So we want to make sure that we're not worried about being perfect, but that we're just doing something, that we're progressing, taking it step by step. So it's like training for a race. You're not going to run that whole mile in one day, right? You're going to take your time, work on the progress of that. And so next we're going to talk about, we can go to the next slide, allyship at work, right? So now we're going to dig into what it really looks like to be an ally in the workplace in numerous ways that we can all do right to get closer to having inclusive workplaces. So next we're going to watch a short video on how to call in and call out comments that are hurtful or offensive. And like I said, it's impact over intent. Your intentions may have been good, but the impact that it caused was very harmful or offensive. And so Masita, if you can cue that video.
How can we use language to challenge other people's behaviour when it's offensive, or stand up on behalf of those who need it?
Unfortunately, we're going to find ourselves in situations where someone's being prejudiced or harmful towards a group or person. And whether that's being racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ageist, ableist, or prejudiced in some other way, it's important that we can let that person know that their behaviour is not okay.
Yeah, what we're talking about is calling someone in or calling someone out based on their behaviour.
Let's discuss the difference between calling in and calling out.
Yeah, essentially they have the same purpose, which is to point out that what someone's doing is not okay. They just have different ways of achieving it.
Calling out is naming in the moment in front of whoever's present that the situation is not okay.
And calling someone in, on the other hand, involves addressing that person's behaviour more privately or personally. It might take place a little bit later on, and it usually involves taking the time to explain why that person's behaviour was offensive.
Okay, let's use an example. I'll pick something a bit random so it's not offensive to anyone. Let's say I'm being really awful about someone who's wearing a dinosaur t-shirt, which of course I'd never do because dinosaur t-shirts are awesome.
True.
Anyway, let's go with it. Hey, I was meaning to tell you, I bumped into Amir last weekend, and get this, it was so messed up. He was wearing a dinosaur t-shirt. As soon as I realized, I got out of there. It was disgusting. Like, how could he think that was okay? And you know what they say about people who wear dinosaur t-shirts.
Hey, come on. People can wear whatever they want. Hey, remember what you said earlier about Amir wearing that t-shirt? I just wanted to clarify what you meant because, to be honest, it's just a t-shirt. We all wear them differently.
So it's obvious from that example that calling out is a much more direct process, which means it can be sometimes met with a defensive reaction. Calling in, on the flip side, is a much more calm process and often takes more time, energy, and patience. But both methods are 100% valid.
Yeah, completely. And let's imagine that in that example, Danny wasn't just talking about a t-shirt. Imagine that those comments had been made about Amir's religious beliefs or cultural clothing or gender diversity or maybe a disability that he has. And while calling someone in is a great way to generate positive conversations, it's not always possible, right? I may not have felt comfortable approaching Danny on a personal level, or maybe they have a form of power over me that makes calling them in really, really difficult, like popularity or leadership, or maybe being part of a majority group.
And realistically, if you're the person experiencing discrimination, it's not up to you to educate the people who are doing the discriminating.
So if you're being discriminated against or oppressed or targeted by someone who has power over you, we reckon you have every right to call that person in or out. But in those moments, you're deciding which approach to take, we think you should ask yourself a few questions. First up, what are their intentions? Are they trying to cause harm or offence, or have they just been careless with their words?
What's best for you? Having the conversation one-on-one or in a setting where there's other people around?
And thirdly, what do you want to get out of it? Do you just want to name that what that person did was offensive, or do you want to explain the impact of their behaviour and how they can improve in the future?
So at the end of the day, we're all going to be faced with prejudice at some point, and it's really important that in those moments, if it's safe for us, we feel empowered to call someone in or out in their behaviour.
Yeah, and we know it's not always easy, but if it means standing up for yourself or somebody else, we reckon it's worth it.
Awesome, thank you for that. And then we're gonna pull the slides up really quick. We're gonna call in and call outs and how they're going to be helpful in our efforts of being a better ally. So here are other ways that we can be allies at work and showing allyships. So the first thing we want to go into is the difference from
Rashima, if you can hear me, you're frozen up a little bit.
Can you all hear me? Okay, awesome.
Better. Thanks, Rashima. Yeah.
No problem. Okay. Okay. So I'll just start back over at microaggressions. So for microaggressions, those are really intentional or unintentional comments and actions that exhibit bias against a disadvantaged group. And so like 1,000 mosquito bites every day, right? And so examples of that could be questions that are, where are you from? Are you good at math? I'm Blacker than you. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't talk like you're Black. Oh, you're so articulate for a Black person. And I'm using Black because I'm a Black person. I'm a Black woman. So I'm using Black as an example. And then people asking, is that your real hair? Or your name is hard to pronounce. Do you have a nickname? And so these are some ways that could potentially cause harm and be microaggressions to people of disadvantaged populations or communities who are marginalized. And so one way to really encounter these is to practice micro affirmations. And what those look like is noticing when someone isn't participating and encouraging them to engage, right? So when we see someone at the workplace, we know they're super intelligent, they have really great ideas. We want to help them to kind of uplift that and really fight against those microaggressions. Another way that we want to do this is to publicly acknowledge people's expertise or skills. So earlier when we talked about being in a meeting and you seeing that white privilege is at play, and we want to say, hey, I heard so-and-so had a really amazing idea. Why don't we dive a little bit deeper into that? Or yes, so-and-so said that earlier, right? So throwing the energy and the light. I love to say energy because that's what we're doing, right? It's positive energy that we really want to bring into effect. And so throwing that energy back their way and putting the spotlight back on them and letting them know you're valuable, you're worth it. I heard you, I'm acknowledging you. Another way is to mirror the language that someone uses to describe themselves. And so here, we always want to highlight language barriers and accessibility. And what that means is language are the words that we use, and then dialogue is how we say it. So that involves our tone, or if you notice that a person isn't really understanding what you're saying, try to dial it down and use plain language, something that everyone understands, right? It doesn't mean that that person isn't smart, that they're not intelligent, that they're not capable. It just means that they understand a different language than you. So earlier when I said from my culture that we say, I hear you, or I'm listening, those mean two different things. I could say that in a room and somebody saying, okay, that person's listening. So people have different dialects within their cultures and communities. And so try to mirror the language that they're using, right? And also what we talked about earlier, if you don't necessarily understand their language or the words they're using, ask questions, right? Be open and ask questions in a way. And you can use the technique of motivational interviewing. So that way you're uplifting, like, wow, I noticed that you're using this thing. I really want to use it too. And saying, I don't really understand. Can you teach me and can you show me? And that also adds value because what you're doing is you're uplifting instead of bringing the person down and not making them feel like, oh, you don't understand what I'm saying, so you must be slow, right? And being derogatory about it. And that's what we don't want to do. Another way is to get to know people, to build relationships and recognize the diversity and all their intersectional identities that they come with. So as Sarah said earlier, all the different identities that she holds and all the different identities that I hold. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a daughter, right? I could be a spouse, all the different things that I hold within myself of being intersectional. We want to uplift that in people. We want to recognize that within people. And of course, ask questions. And then we want to get to a place where we can be exhibit cultural humility, right? So we have respect and understanding of another person's culture. Even if we don't necessarily understand every single thing about it, we respect it because that's their culture and we're not going to take away from that. And so the next one is, which we just watched an amazing video on. It's calling in and calling out, which is really, really important to do, right? And so when we see that harm has been done, and I'm going to say it again, impact over intent, a person could be talking and it's something like, if you grew up a certain kind of way and you're just saying what you grew up to and you're used to, and you're not recognizing that it's causing harm or it's offensive, it feels so natural to you, right? And so instead of calling a person out, which is being really kind of rude about it, or bringing negative attention to it and saying you're wrong, right, and being really aggressive with it, calling them out in front of everybody, right, what we want to do is we're going to do a calm and gentle call in. And so that's acknowledging that something happened. We're not directly pointing at that person, especially if it's a group. We want to make sure that we're raising it to the entire group, being a way to call it in and respectfully do it. And then say, for instance, in the video, when he called her out, how would you say it, right? So don't just call a person in or a group in and let everybody be aware of what happened. Calmly say, how would you would have done it? Or how do you do it, right? If you don't want to be direct and you don't want to bring that negative energy, calmly of how would you say something to the group. And so it can be really an effective way to create an inclusive workplace. And then the next one that we have is mentoring and sponsorship. So thinking about how can you use your privilege, your contacts, your resources, and positional power to help others? So we talked about this earlier when we talked about being an ally in private, right? So the privilege that that person had in that sense, where they were white and the people who were shopping were people of color, right? And their privilege was they can walk in any store, whether it's with coins, a change, or a card, and they have the privilege and power to purchase what they want. And they noticed that these other people didn't, and they were being racially profiled. How do you use your privilege in this situation, right? Do you stand up and you buy it for them? For people who are looking for jobs and they can't get hired because discrimination is at place, who do you know? Who can you connect to? What kind of resources? So there's so many different things that you can do within your circle to be able to be an ally in the situation. Another one that we have is champion colleagues, right? So if you're being selected to speak or take on a prestigious task at work, think about recommending a community who's been marginalized or a Black, Indigenous person of color for that position. So they always call on you when you know there's other great talents around the room. You know, you see it and you wonder why they're not being acknowledged. Actually, I recommend this person to do it. You know, I've seen some of their work, they're super amazing. Or even if I haven't seen their work, because sometimes you've never been given a chance to exhibit that, you're so amazing, you want to see it. And so you uplift that and you amplify that. And so that's a way that you can really champion your colleagues who you see are, you know, being discriminated against or not being given the same opportunities. This is a way that you can be an ally in the workplace to that situation. And then, of course, we talked on this about meaning awareness when white privilege is at play. So you can call it out, as we said again, or call it in. We can do call-ins and say, actually, I agree with Devontae, right? Or I agree with Sarah, or I agree with what Debbie said, right? And pointing out that this person uplifted that first. And we're going to acknowledge and give that to that person, right? We're going to validate what that person said. We're not going to take away from that person and ignore them, right? Because we don't ignore. And if anything, at the least, we move in self and silence until we're ready to build up to that 100%. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're providing quality feedback, right? So people of color or even communities and populations who are marginalized tend to receive less quality feedback that could really help them with course correction and develop to be leaders. And this might be because white managers are fearful of how Black, Indigenous, or people of color will receive their comments, or maybe an ally and want to keep them stagnant. And so they don't progress, and that they, you know, just stay in the same place, and that they continue to elevate one race. And so with this example, we see this happen a lot when we talk about generational poverty versus generational wealth. And so even thinking about the homeless response system itself, we want to continue to uplift the white population to buy real estate, to continue to build wealth, to continue to be in those larger rooms that promote their race, right? But when it comes to people of color, or when it comes to marginalized communities, we see, hey, we're going to give a voucher so that you depend on this voucher. We're going to help you to get housing, but you're going to stay in this house and you're going to depend on the system to continue to give you housing, right? So the welfare system is doing exactly what it was meant to do. And so what we want to do is break that up by providing quality feedback of how to help. others to elevate? How do we want to help marginalized communities to elevate, or people of color to be in better positions, right? And we want to do this, as we talked earlier, when using the right dialogue. So if it has been a situation where you wanted to give feedback, but you didn't necessarily know how, and because of the style, right, it seemed too aggressive, or it seemed too angry, or whether it was about the skill, we want to do that and making sure we work on our tone of how to say that, how to approach a situation, and also give disclaimers. When I call my friends and we're talking about something really deep and they said they just needed to ear to listen, the first thing I say is, do you want feedback, or do you just want an ear to listen to, right? And I give them the power to choose of how that conversation is going to go. So in situations where you want to help people and you want to give that feedback, what you want to do is you want to say, hey, I saw something and I was wondering if I could give you advice on something. You don't even have to state what it is, because you don't want to, if they say no, you don't want them thinking about it for days of, oh, wow, I must suck at this. So you want to just say, hey, I want to ask for permission. Can I give you advice on something? If that person allows you into that space to give them that advice, then you go and you work on your tone of how you said it. So, hey, I noticed you were speaking earlier and I noticed you said this. And sometimes, you'll get better feedback if you say it like this. Or I noticed that when you did this document, you did this. And, so you want to do things to help them to better their skill set, to help them to feel more confident. You want to make sure that you're uplifting. And the same day that we said we don't want to bring negative energy, or we don't want to say negative terminology, and we're saying we go from good to great, right? So we're not calling anybody out. We're not saying anybody's doing anything wrong. We're saying here are ways that you can improve on what you're already doing. And so that's how we have to communicate that to communities who are being marginalized. Because feedback is so crucial to all of us. And without it, we can't improve. And without that feedback, that person can't grow, right? And so with that, we're going to go to a large group discussion. And our question is, what can you do at work to be an ally in the fight against structural racism? And how can allies use their privilege to create change? And so because of my internet issues, I'm going to stay off camera. I wish I could be on camera with you all. I'm going to stay off camera, but I would love for you all to come on camera to share with us some responses, some reflections about what I've just talked about, and then also answering the 2 questions that we have for you all. And again, it's, what can you do at work to be an ally in the fight against structural racism? And then how can allies use their privilege to create change at work?
Thank you, Rashima. That was great. You can also describe, if you've seen people be allies at work, what that's looked like when you've seen other folks act in allyship for someone else or for yourself.
So I can lead us off with an example of, Sarah, I love that question that you posed, right? Taking it off of not just what do we do, but what have we seen? And I'm gonna uplift one of our co-founders of REP, Donald Whitehead, super amazing. And something he's done to be an ally to the community, and he's a Black man. But something he's done is he has taken initiative to ensure to promote people and to give people opportunities who are experiencing homelessness or who have experienced homelessness and don't have that, college degree, all the things that the this capitalist country looks for, to be able to help people to elevate and to build wealth and to even have a sufficient life, right? And whatever that means for that person. He's taking these individuals and giving them opportunities. He's taught them, he leads trainings, and helping them to be better. And so for me, just because he's not a white person doesn't mean he's not an ally. And as we talked about earlier, allyship lies a lot in race, but it could be in anything. And for me, that's something that I've seen, the initiative that he has taken to ensure I'm going to be an ally to the community because he now has privilege. And so he's used his privilege to bring others up. And so he's not here, but I just wanted to uplift him. And he's one of the co-founders of REP. And so we would love to hear from you all from anything that I've discussed, whether it was about the call-ins to meeting awareness, any of the methods that we talked about to be an ally. And then what allies do you think from what I've said, even talking about the 5 Ds, how could they be helpful to you all in improving your efforts in being an ally? And then what allies can you use? How can you use allies as a privilege to help change at the workplace?
Folks can also put it into chat. No.
The only thing that I can think of that is very direct, very specifically to the workplace, is providing letters of support, because we use our, I guess, like our nonprofit name, our like what we represent, and to support other communities or other agencies that are, working towards something.
Thank you, Lucia. That's using the sort of positional power of your organization to support other organizations that may not have that same level of power. So important. I'll share, I spent about 30 years in the justice reform space. And I would say that the justice reform space or transformation space is behind the homelessness advocacy space when it comes to engaging with people with lived experience. And I think that they're catching up, but it took a while to get there. And one of the things that we did when I was at my organization was, it was a youth justice organization. And eventually we just said, we're not gonna engage with any young people unless we're paying them a fair wage to engage in, whether it's a panel discussion or being on a committee, that young people's, their experience was crucial for us to be able to do our work. And we needed to honor that, that expertise and give them fair compensation. I think something that we learned a little late from the homelessness space.
Thank you for that, Sarah. That was really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Even if it's not about the questions that we just asked, things that are crossing your mind, or things that we haven't touched on yet?
If not, we can move forward. What do you think, Rashima?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. If no one has no reflections or comments, and also, like I said, we know that some people need more time to process than others, and I know that was a lot to take in, then yes, we can absolutely move to the next slide. Awesome, awesome. So there was something I said earlier pertaining to, public facing you, the person who you are in public versus your private thoughts. And so we just want to uplift again that your thoughts become your words and your words become your actions. And so you have the power to do that, nobody else. And so taking that effort and starting off from not ignoring, right, whether that is moving in silence and stealth, to then making that words, letting other people be aware of what they can do, and then turning that into action. So being better 1% better each day. Next slide, Sarah. Awesome. And just here before we depart, here's an amazing quote that if you have to come help me, you're wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound together with mine, then let us walk together. And just wanted to say that allyship requires a common cause, right? So you have to see your own fate connected to the fate of another. And with that, we'll leave you all to have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Rashima. Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation today. We do have some time left, so if there's discussion, we'll happily stay here to hear it. But I'll go ahead and close this out, stop the recording, and if folks want to talk until 1 o'clock, we are happy to do that. So thank you for attending this California Housing Community Development Training Session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant, Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. Look out for more sessions from our community workshop series, specifically our racial equity series. We're doing almost every single week here on Thursdays. We are going to, when we close this session, you'll get or when you leave, you'll get a 3-question survey. Please fill that out and let us know what we've done well, what we haven't done well, what else you'd like to know. We read that every week, and we do adjust our sessions based on your feedback. With that, I'm going to say thank you. I will stop the recording.